Welcome back to the Soulful Afro Show with Miss Yvette and our special guest, Miss Chioma. All right?
So let's jump right in. So Hassan, you said you had a story of something that happened to you. Could you?
Yes. A few stories, but
Okay.
this one really kind of shocked me.
Mhm.
And I sat in a restaurant for a while and spoke to her. So I walked in, and it's a Caribbean restaurant, and there was this lady, older lady, um, talking to this guy about Ebola. And she said, "Well, I'm from the Ebola-free country. I'm Nigerian. Ebola is free there." So I sat. I just was just looking. I didn't want to say anything yet. So she kept on talking. The guy's like, "Well, what do you mean, Nigerian is free of Ebola? They had Ebola
Was
there."
the guy Caribbean?
Yeah, he's from Caribbean, but he's really into the African culture. So he says Marina, but he's like, "Well, your other countries, Sierra Leone, Liberia, these are your people. You should be concerned about that, even though Nigeria is free of Ebola." So fine. So I said,
Was
"Okay."
it really a Nigerian?
Yes, I'm gonna. That's what I'm saying. That's why I was shocked after. That's why I was shocked after I asked my questions.
All right.
So I creeped a little bit towards her. I looked at her for a little bit. I said, "Oh, I'm from Sierra Leone." That's what she'll just realize what get within herself and realize what she's talking about. I said, "Well, I'm from Sierra Leone. I know my family's there right now, and it's a little terrifying for me." And she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, for your family and so on and so forth." So we tried to talk, and we started talking about where Ebola, because my thing is I want to know where Ebola came from, and based on my readings of it, right now I know there's a couple of labs in Sierra Leone, and they had to shut it down because they found out that somebody got infected. But what made it worse for her was that she said that she is a nurse practitioner, number one, and number two, the reason why Ebola came from, that she was so defensive that it came from bushmeats and the people eating it. And that's where Ebola, that was her sense of where Ebola came from. And we were trying to, figure out maybe there's other ways, because I think Africans been eating meat, whatever meat, for thousands and thousands of years. All of a sudden now is why people are infected. So she didn't really want to hear that. That there was no other reasons. She didn't want to hear that Nigeria has Ebola. She didn't want to hear anything.
Yeah,
So that's what I just walked out.
Well, I think the big question people are asking, a lot of people who understand the politics of this, is that it didn't just show up. And I'm someone who strongly believe it wasn't because somebody was eating bushmeat.
Right.
Like, that makes
And she's arguing
That's
she's
so
a
funny
nurse.
because in the NPR interview, Angelique said this has been around. It's like climate change, and we wait for it to be in an emergency and crisis, and when it affects certain people, that we then decide to pay
Well,
attention
I
to.
mean, I don't know. I don't even think that Ebola has been around because it's been eradicated.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it just pops up in the middle of Guinea. Like, come on, people, let's get serious.
Can we use that word again, polytricks?
Well, I mean, do we really have time to talk? There's so much.
I
About
can I
this.
put that
This is
out?
a part 2 or part 3.
Guess who says it all the time?
Who?
Maka, the mama Maka.
Oh, I need to put polytricks.
She calls it polytricks. So let's be clear, and I keep asking the question, so what is up in Guinea and Liberia and Sierra Leone that folks want? That's what I want to know.
Well,
What is up in?
we
I
know.
know Liberia. I know Liberia is struggling with their infrastructure and things like that. I think that's part of the reason why they haven't been able to control the epidemic. I think the other reason, are in talking to Liberians, because the lack of a response from the president. But I keep asking, what's up in those countries that folks want? Because this is a pandemic. This isn't an epidemic. This is a pandemic. And the response to this pandemic has been very, very sort of laxed. And I know that you can't just, Ebola would not just pop up in the middle of because it's some bushmeat. Like, if that was the case, then so many other people in Guinea, in Sierra Leone, would have, especially in the village, would have Ebola.
Right.
So how does that? Because because I'm gonna be losing you, and I don't want to lose this opportunity. So we're talking about Ebola, but Ebola and how it's being dealt with, the stigmatizing of the people, the stigmatizing of the country also comes with your expertise of HIV/AIDS and how it relates to Haiti.
And the same excuse about bushmeat and monkeys when AIDS first came out.
So
Right.
where are the similarities that you see?
Well, I mean, I think you pointed out one in terms of the way ethnic communities are stigmatized, right? And so Haiti was under the same level of stigmatization as now we see Liberians and Sierra Leone and Africans. Let me just say that because folks are not separating by country.
No,
Africa is one big country.
Yeah.
Right.
Because Bill Riley don't even know that West Africa is the whole continent.
Like that's not a country, baby. That includes about multiple countries. So I think that you're spot on in terms of the U.S. history in doing this. Like that's why I think that at some point you have to say, okay, we understand the environment that we're in, right? And so how do we deal with it knowing that environment? Nobody should be surprised at the way the media is dealing with this. Nobody should be surprised at the way that Africans are being pointed at, are being, criticized to a point in terms of not being able to contain it and bringing it to the U.S. Nobody should be surprised because that is the history of Western world. So now the question is, what can we do about it to address it? One, to help Liberia, Sierra Leone, deal with the pandemic, right? Because Nigeria has dealt with it, Guinea has dealt with it. And you can't tell me it's about resources because Guinea has to be poorer than Liberia or Sierra Leone. They have to be poorer than Liberia. Yeah. So I mean, it can't be about resources.
And their infrastructure is less.
Right. I don't think their infrastructure would. Well, I don't know. Liberia is struggling. So I mean, so the question is, what can we do to support those countries? I know individuals who have actually gone back to those countries to help and have come back. So what can we do? And not on an individual basis, but more on a countrywide basis. The other thing is I really, really, really like the campaign that's going around and saying
I'm not the virus. I really like it.
Because I think that's a way for us to fight back to the lack of awareness, the lack of support happening in the media.
And if folks haven't seen it, it's been on the Soulful Afro Show, and I will put it up again.
Okay.
I really like that campaign.
Yeah. There's actually a nice video that I saw earlier today of the sister who actually started the campaign.
Okay, so if you want to send it to me so we can share it with the Soulful Afro audience, that would be great.
So I think that's an excellent way, as a way to build awareness about the ignorance of people. I think also part of the issue is the federal agencies and the government and the state. So I've been contacted by the state. Massachusetts Department of Public Health. I've been contacted by the Office of Refugee and Immigrant, all the state agencies that are supposed to respond to this. I've been contacted to educate Africans about it. And I'm like, well, are Africans the only ones that need to be educated? Like, hello, are Africans the only ones that need to know about how do you get Ebola? Because part of the issue is nobody knows how you get Ebola. Because if you know how you get Ebola, then you wouldn't be talking foolishness in the first place, right? Yeah. If you know the individuals that you need to be conscious of, it's not just any African or anyone who talks with an accent, right? It has to do with individuals who have been back and forth to the country within a certain amount of time. Yeah. Right? Yeah. If somebody's been here for 5 years, why are you all of a sudden saying this person got Ebola and starts coughing while all of a sudden you guys say this person has Ebola? So,
and it's become a joke. Like people literally, you hear people coughing and people are like,
did you see on Facebook?
I may have Ebola. I mean, they cleared out a flight.
Did you see on Facebook that someone did it as a Halloween?
No.
Costume prank?
I couldn't get past the Ray Rice costume prank, and then now we're talking about someone.
Somebody dressed up in what do you call those? The
PPE.
The big suits.
Right.
The plastic protective suits. Folks have lost their mind.
Really. Now, if that was your mother, your daughter, your son.
That's why I didn't think the Ray Rice thing was. If you don't you have a sister, a wife, a mother? Why would you think it would be cute to be dragging a woman on the floor? Right. We condemn him.
They made sure the doll was black, though.
Yes, and they condemn him. You shoot him down, but then you make that a joke. Right. It's so contradicting. Right. So I want to catch you on 2 other topics that I'm touching on. But give me a closing message around this before I do that.
I don't know, because I'm still sitting in it myself. I think that, it is time for us to talk about us. When I say us, I mean brown and black folks, to talk about united front, because I'm really, really tired of the way that we separate ourselves from each other and don't understand that our journey is tied to each other, and especially our journey here in the U.S. It's going to require us to have a united voice if we're going to deal with anything that has to do with brown and black folks. So that's one thing that is really sitting on my heart right now. The other thing is that I do want Africans to continue to fight back, continue to give their voice to the media, continue to give their voice to the newspapers and say, this is what's happening to my child when he or she goes to school. This is what's happening to me. Like, how the hell can you tell me not to go to work because I start coughing? Like, what is that? Can we say discrimination? Can we say a lawsuit? Like, we need to start lending our voices to this narrative so that it speaks to the truth in our realities. And so that folks will see a different face to what's happening, really. And the last thing is for us to really be, for those of us who have the privilege of status here, immigration status, for those of us who have the privilege of being U.S. citizens here, that we really need to figure out how to support immigrants in dealing with this. Immigrant communities, like the Liberian community, Sierra Leonean community, folks from Guinea, we really need to figure out how to support them in dealing with this, because folks are having a huge burden, You know, they, before this epidemic, they only had to support 2 families, now they have to support 5. I mean, it's that serious. Where, communities, individuals are being told to stay in your house as much as possible. Folks are having a huge burden. So we need to figure out how to support our immigrant communities here, who are also supporting their families and who are mourning family members. People are dying. People very close to us are dying, and we need to be more conscious of that and give this narrative a more emotional reality. So that's a lot, but that's all.
That's amazing. So I'm not going to take a break, but I wanted to get your reaction. 2 things. There was a comedian this week, Artie Lang, who came at the ESPN. I'm going to read it to you. Came at the ESPN host making slavery sex jokes. And he tweeted, "Hey, Carrie Champion, let me and you get busy."
Right.
And then the next tweet was, "After having 8 illegitimate kids together with Carrie Champion and I married at the Knights of Columbus in Linden, New Jersey." Problem with that? So he has had to apologize for it. But the thing is that it was already done. And he is saying that he's a comedian and that he didn't realize that it was.
There was a parallel story that happened with a black comedian who did something. Was it a black comedian? I can't remember the parallel story.
Okay.
But another person did the same thing. And the person was a black person now you're going to make me pull it.
Well, no, because it said, here it is. Let's see how many people rush to defend Champion, who's the black woman, and forced Lang to apologize the same way people defended Iggy Azalea when Snoop bullied her online.
Yes.
And Snoop had to come out and apologize to her, and all this stuff because people took offense to it. But yet he,
But you know what I always like saying too is that I always find in comedy there's truth.
Yes.
Especially if
this is how he really thinks.
Right. And that's how, and actually Dick Gregory and Richard Pryor used to say how they used to use comedy to get truth out about racism that was happening and things like that. So I really think that in comedy there's truth, and I think that he didn't mean it. He meant it the way that everybody's taking it, in terms of he meant to hurt her, and he meant it in a very racist and sexist manner.
Oh yeah, I don't think it was a joke.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to the over sexualizing of black women, and what we have to go through. And this is just someone that voiced it out loud,
He probably was drunk and high and did, you know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden woke up and was like, oh damn. But he did it. And I don't think apology is enough.
Yeah.
And I wonder if she
has not said anything.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, because of her position, because of the station, she's a station, right? I don't know if she would say something.
She hasn't directly said. ESPN did come out and say something.
But that's part of us swallowing people's shit.
Well, it's like I think about Pam Oliver, who was the sister that covered football, NFL football, who is so on point as a reporter. But people had issues with her hair, with her this, with her that, and now she was replaced by the white reporter. And Pam is a seasoned reporter. Girlfriend knows her stuff. So there was ageism, colorism, and all that stuff that happened to her. So, we're constantly, on the receiving end of this. The question is, how do we take it and how do we deal with it? Then the other two things is,
I thought you said one.
One more thing that brings the sort of the African conversation to Latin America is that about the conflict between that's happening in the Dominican Republic around taking away the citizenship from Dominicans of African descent to the point that they have basically deported thousands of people. The UN and the OAS came out and said that this was against the human rights of those people, that they condemned the Dominican Republic for doing this. The Dominican Republic's response to this is removing themselves from the OAS. So here it is now, they're sort of hanging on their own that no one is going to be holding them accountable, even though the ones that can hold them accountable, they have not been able to have them switch. But this speaks to also not only an external but an internal, because this is we're talking about the external around how people see the continent and all of that, but the Dominican internal conflict of race is deep. Because they want to say that it's a constitutional decision and but their history of race and blackness and lack of self-identity is so embedded in them that they can't even see.
But it's embedded in their constitution, though.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So it is constitutional law. If you take it that way, it's embedded in their policies and their laws.
They don't get to check off black on their ID. To put black on a Dominican ID, you have to get permission because it's not one of the options that they have. We have a colleague that took almost 2 years to get just the letter N, negro, to self-identify on her ID, and she had to go through so much channel to just get it done. So, my whole thing is, it's coming at us in so many ways. But then there was a report that I wanted to point out. So how do you say it? Nahishi?
Okay, we'll go with that.
He writes, and he did this wonderful piece he says white supremacy and a life of struggle. And he's basically telling us we shouldn't be surprised that all of this is happening. We shouldn't be upset that all of this is happening. This is supposed to be happening because everything that is structured around us
is evolved
around this happening. So he says,
you're reading it?
Yeah, no. I've read it, and now in general, when I write something like that, I'm writing to Black people. No, that's not the part I wanted. That our condition is not a mistake, that we don't need to run around pretending as though there's some great mystery going on. It's not. If an alien came to planet Earth and looked at socioeconomic statistics for African Americans and then measured that against the history and the policies of this country, there would really be no surprises about who we are and where we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because there are things that are not within our control in this country, but there are things that are always get out of control, and one of those things is that the level of stress that we put on ourselves, thinking that we should be thinking or feeling differently from what we're in.
And I think part of that is white supremacy and whiteness, though. Whiteness wants you to believe that, no, this is the way that it was. There's no history behind it. This is just the way it is. Coincidence, right? That there wasn't a structured way in which blacks were given less and whites were given more. And we continue to see that. We could talk about that religiously in health, whether it's health outcomes, access to health. So, I mean, I think us as Black folks do need to stop being surprised. I totally agree with that statement. That's why I said with Ebola, nobody should be surprised at the way that the U.S. is handling it, at the way that Black and brown folks are, Africans are being looked at in the media around Ebola. Nobody should be surprised. I agree with that. We shouldn't be stressed out about that.
Exactly.
What we need to be stressed out about is dealing with it.
Yeah.
Right? Dealing with it in a way that isn't, I think that you need all ways of advocacy, right? You need advocacy, folks that are sitting in the front lines with the people, yelling, doing whatever. Marching. You need those folks. You also need those folks in certain political positions doing what they need to do. We need folks in certain academic institutions doing what they need to do. We need our advocacy agenda to be diverse. We're too busy reacting instead of planning and being proactive about these issues. And so for me, it's like, okay, we know the deal. Let's do something about it, but let's be smart about it. We can't continue to be yelling and hollering up and down the streets. It serves the purpose. Like I always want that crazy person in my group because that crazy person serves a purpose. Okay, but we need to be strategic about our moves, and we need to take light from those who continue to oppress us.
Yep.
I also want to jump on. I also think I've been thinking about this for the past few weeks now. I think the best way to deal with this situation is to be truthful and honest. Meaning this: whoever the Europeans think they are in America, we gotta let people know. Number one, this ain't their country. They came and stole this country. Okay. Number two, they had to go to Africa to bring people here to help make this country it is. So when they talk about racism and how people get vexed or upset, start crying, the truth needs to come out. I think that's the way that we're going to help stop this, because that's not talked about a lot. We always talk about what can we do to help, what are the solutions, and that's the main thing. Be truthful, be honest. The people who are here don't even exist in the American society. So why would you think we would exist in American society if we don't speak the truth and the honest truth? And one more thing I was telling my friend the other day is when slavery was abolished because of the war was ended, they made those black people or Africans permanent citizens, right? So if that's the case, in turn, the generations after that should be citizens as well. The individuals came here as immigrants. They didn't have no citizenship. Does not mean that their kids shouldn't have citizenship either. So I think those things should be explored in a way where that should also be part of our defense in saying that let's use the honest and the truth in how this country was established to also make our point as well.
So I'm not gonna let you go. I want you to close out the show with you. So we're gonna take a quick break, and then you have to think of a kind. She's not gonna leave. You're closing out the show with me. We're gonna take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and you're going to share a kind act of the week that stood out. Something good and pretty and sweet that stood out in your world this week.
I can't share that. That's too personal.
Oh! Did you hear her say that?
I heard it, and I'm gonna explore it.
Okay.
This is Soulful Afro Show. Miss Yvette, special guest Miss Chioma. We'll be right back. Listen to AfricanRadioOnline.com, the big voice of Africa. Keep it locked.